So this morning, we continue with our series called Get Comfy. And last week, Josh opened up our series as we talked about the fun topic of money. And what's crazy is that Josh and I, we've been kind of, as we were preparing for this message series, we kind of asked ourselves, like, what are some of these topics? And for me, God has laid specific topics on my heart that I believe that he wants and desires us to talk about. And it's going to get uncomfortable. I'm just going to be very honest with you. It's going to get uncomfortable with some of these. But as we were preparing and talking about money, it's just this idea that God continually has shown up and been faithful to our church since we started to talk about that. Since we started to have the conversation and be real about what God has spoken and desired for us, God's been faithful in that. And on the flip side of that, I'll say this. You, as a church, have been faithful in walking in obedience with what he has laid on your hearts and called you to do too. And I praise God for that. God has been moving incredibly in that. And today, as we continue this series topic, I want to bring up Becca. And Becca's going to share a little bit to kind of kick off this morning. And so Becca's going to share a little bit of her story. And I believe that Becca, when I had the chance to sit down with Becca, I don't even know, maybe a few months ago, we were just chatting about some different ideas and different things that God has laid on her heart. And then we just started talking. I said, hey, I have this sermon series coming up, and would you be okay if I stretched you a little bit and asked you to share something?
Yeah, guys, this is me stepping out of the boat.
And she literally, her exact response was like, more or less like, it's either you're really crazy or God's up to something, and like God's crazy too. And I'm like, well, it might be a little bit of both. And so Becca's going to share just a little bit of her story. And I believe that in this, I truly believe that you'll get a glimpse maybe of just someone who most of you guys know, have seen, in the journey that God has been walking with her and walked with her on and continues to. So I'm going to let Becca kind of share her story. So would you just give it up for Becca real quick?
Thanks, guys. It's kind of different being up here without a lead singer and a background music, so we'll see how this goes. Before I begin, there are a few things I'd like to make really clear. First, although this is part of my story, it's not all of it, and I'm not the point of it. Second, I do not share this part of my story lightly. I've found that often, after I tell someone, I'm treated differently. So, right now, I am the same person that you've known, and I will be after as well. And third, and probably most importantly, I was saved before this happened. I've known God my whole life. I was raised in the church. And this is not the story of coming to know God. This is the story of how God will use whatever you have. So, 2002. I was 26 years old. I was a single mom. I went from sleeping on the couch of a friend of mine to buying a house. I climbed the ladder at work from a part-time serving position to opening and closing manager. I was doing my best to lose the 150 pounds I'd gained having a baby. And I was focused on doing everything I could to build a better life. On Saturday, April 31st, late in the evening, I was rushing home. It had been a long day. A morning with a senior photo shoot at a park by my parents' house in Lowell, an errand running throughout the day, and then a rare evening out with my sister, who was also my roommate at the time. We had just stopped at my parents' house to pick up my daughter, who was 9 months old at the time, and I was following my sister back to the house. Now, I didn't normally follow my sister back to the house. I drove clunkers, like they always broke down, so she always followed me because we never knew if I was making it home. But her car needed a tire change. All four of her tires were like threadbare. I was like, no, you go first, I'll follow you. I was less than 5 miles from my house, guys, like walking distance. And my front driver's side tire blew. Now, I'm almost home. And I had to be up at 4:30 in the morning the next day. I was the opening manager on Sunday. It's like my first shot at like a big shift on a holiday weekend. I had spent my extra cash on going out celebrating the fact that I'd finally gotten the big shift and knew I couldn't afford a tow. Ellie had been fussy on the ride and had just fallen asleep to Mercedes-Benz by Janis Joplin. Yeah, you guys get the irony in that one. So I did my best to be quiet, crawled out of the cars, crossed my fingers, and called a tow truck, hoping they'd just change the tire. A couple of guys in a pickup stopped and offered to change, and I said, no, I got a tow truck coming, it's okay. And about 20 minutes after that, the tow truck arrived. So I'm on the side of the road, the tow truck parks in front of me with his work lights on. So he's facing the opposite direction, but he's got 2 large lights just flashing into the road. So it looked like he was getting ready to tow it. I'm beginning to freak out at this point. Again, had no money for a tow. The driver turned on his lights, and it was quite dark at the time. He set about changing the tire. While he worked, my mind bounced back and forth. How late was it getting? With all the work I'd put into getting the promotion, was I about to blow it by being too tired the next morning? How was I going to get to work if this did turn into a tow? How much later would I have to be up if he woke up the baby? Cars zipped by. I would not be able to make the bills if I had to do the tow. Then with his bare hands, guys, I watched him twist the head of the tire iron clean off. At that point, I'm like flipping out in my head, thinking, great. How does that even happen? This guy wasn't like The Rock. He wasn't built. He just twisted it off. That was the mental straw that kind of broke the camel's back, so to speak. I had just watched the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, a story of a single girl in her late 20s who finally found herself, career, and love. Most days, I have this inner dialogue, right? God knows everything. So he knows my thoughts. So I don't even bother speaking out loud most of the time in prayer. It's just going on in my head. So in my head, I'm going, well, when? When will I ever catch up? When will I get things right? When do I get my happily ever after? And when? When are you going to take care of me? Guys, no sooner did those thoughts cross my mind than headlights came running at me. A drunk driver, thinking the works lights on the tow truck were a car, drove straight at me. I was thrown 30 feet, well, not first. I was thrown through the front of my car, back out over the top of my car, and then into a field 30 feet away. I woke up with a mouth of what felt like hot metal, to the sound of screaming crickets, with dirt pressed against my face. Couldn't get up, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. I came in and out of consciousness, and sometimes I was just lost in a fog. The emergency workers followed the sounds of my moans to find me. After they pulled me from the field, I was aerometed to Butterworth. In the hall of Butterworth, their orthopedic surgeon on duty did an evaluation, and he kept asking me if I could feel my feet. Mind you, he's poking them at this point with sharp objects. And I'm saying, yes, I feel that. I tried to explain that my feet were stained that morning. When I'd done the photo shoot, I had waded into a stream with brand new black leather shoes on. And the surgeon just wouldn't listen. Fortunately, one of the med techs on duty was a friend of my sister's, and he pushed for the orthopedic surgeon, the head of the department, to be called in, which was controversial because he was scheduled to leave in like 3 hours for vacation. But Dr. Bielema was called, and he came in. He spent the next 20-some hours putting me back together. He put a plate in my lower left arm and a rod in my left leg. He put a plate in my right arm and another rod in my lower left leg and pins in both of my shoulders. To that point, if you weighed 200 pounds and traction was not an option, meaning you had internal injuries or they wouldn't be able to turn you, or for whatever reason traction wasn't an option, if your legs were crushed between your knees and your ankles, they automatically amputated your feet. There wasn't any question. They just took them off, lose the foot, save the person. I was 360 pounds. My feet were black, which is a leading sign that there's no circulation. But Bielema saw past the fat and around the leather dye and decided to just try the procedure anyway. So in total, both my legs were crushed between the knees and ankles. My spine was fractured. My shoulders were both dislocated, both my arms broken in various places. My face was degloved, and I had a skull fracture. Now, I don't know if you can see very clearly, but this is the skull fracture right here. It's in the shape of a heart. I had undefined internal bleeding and a closed head injury. There's no logical explanation as to why I'm standing here. I was in surgery for over 24 hours after arriving at the hospital, and I spent an additional day unresponsive before I woke up, unable to move, unable to feed, toilet, or bathe myself. I was completely taken care of. Completely. I spent over 2 weeks in intensive care, then over 2 months in a nursing home. Couldn't go to Mary Free Bed. I didn't have a working limb. They require one working limb to get in there. I spent over 2 years in physical therapy with extensive neurological testing and a total of over 28 surgeries and procedures. God has shown me what it is to be completely taken care of. Because this happened to me, when it happened, they changed the procedures on how to use rods and legs. Dr. Bielema's test with me is now in textbooks. The x-rays you just saw are what are taught to orthopedic surgeons. So let's look at what that means. 2002, that's at the beginning of the Afghanistan and Iraq conflict. So all those soldiers that went there that are over 200 pounds, they didn't have to lose their legs. Car crashes, all those people, all of the doctors taught after that point, they didn't have to lose their legs. I have no question if God is taking care of me, because the simple truth is that He is. With every breath, in every moment, and with everything I have. And if you surrender all of that to Him, He'll use it, whatever it is. So, what do you do when the impossible, the horrific, and the seemingly unsurmountable happens to you? How do you reconcile that sometimes the price of life is pain with the knowledge that God is completely in control? Sometimes you can't. You just have to trust that the pain has purpose. Believe that God is in control and know He loves you. I know that Jesus died for me, and He is with me at every single moment, every turn. Not because I have tremendous faith. This isn't like a faith matter. He's shown me. I'm like Thomas in this. That's it in a nutshell.
when I was talking with Becca about this week, I said one of those topics I want to talk about is that question of why God? Why me? Why this? Why that? Why? And she kind of touched on that. Like, if God is good, if God is love, how does this happen? And what's crazy is I think we can identify with that. Some of us have asked that question, why am I going through this? Why is this happening? What did I do to deserve this? How do I even come out of this? And what good is this for me? What good is this? And what I appreciate so much about Becca is her willingness. Her willingness to share, yes, but her willingness to continue to trust and walk with God each and every day. And that's not saying that it's been butterflies and rainbows and unicorns since then, right? And there's been days where you ask those same questions sometimes.
Not loudly and
No, right. Not loudly anymore, but you still might think it every once in a while. And I think that's where some of us might even be maybe this morning. Or if we're just being honest, maybe we've walked through that this week. But what if we stopped asking the question, why am I going through this, and started to ask, God, what are you preparing me for? What are you preparing me for? That's risky, that's hard. But hear me out. What if instead of the why, it's the what God is up to? Instead of, God, why am I going through this? What are you preparing me for? What if just in a moment, just in those simple moments, we change that mindset, we change that question to maybe, just maybe, see what God has in store for us. In John 16, here Jesus is, and we're going to read it in a short second here, Jesus is sitting here. And he's having this conversation, and I imagine this is probably most likely Last Supper, before the garden type of thing. And this is what he says in John 16, verse 33. I've told you all of this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. I want to tear this apart for a hot second. Sound good? Yep. So read that again, but slower, okay? Jesus is explaining to his disciples. And he says, I've told you all of this so that you may have what? Guys, I'm a holla back type of person. So, I had some energy drink this morning. We're ready to go. So, Jesus is telling his disciples all of this so that they may have peace. Peace. And it's intriguing to me here. He offers them peace. He offers them peace. He offers them peace in the midst of the upcoming trial and hardship and pain that he will be facing. Think about this. This is before he goes to the garden. This is before the moment in John 17 where he pauses to pray in the garden, where he prays for all believers, not just his disciples. This is before the moment Judas comes up and gives him a big sloppy wet kiss on the cheek. This is before Peter denies him. This is before hanging on the cross and being beaten and brutally abused and mocked and spit upon. This is before all of that. And here Jesus is, and he says, I tell you all this so that you may have peace in me. Before these people sitting around the table with him, who he knows will betray him, he knows will lead to his arrest, knows will deny him, knows that he's heading down a road of being tortured and beaten and crucified and mocked. He tells them this so that they may have peace. I wonder, did Jesus have that peace that surpasses understanding in that moment for himself? Because he knows what's to come, but he has peace, and he has enough peace to offer it to his disciples. And what's intriguing to me here is, as I read this, he doesn't promise the peace. He offers the peace. I tell you this so that you may have peace. What's intriguing is that people may go through life and never choose to receive and experience this peace, but it's offered freely to them. The disciples had this offer to experience this peace that Jesus is offering to them, but they have to choose to walk in that. And as you continue to read it, you see that in some translations it says, "In me you will find true peace." The only place to find true peace is in him. It's not just knowing him, but being and looking in him and being in an active relationship with him. And what I love about this is he offers them peace, but then the very next sentence, he's offering peace, but then he says, here on earth, you will have. This is a guarantee. This is a promise. You will have, you will encounter, this will happen. You will have to go through trials and sorrows. He offers peace, but he promises tribulations. He knows that I have a peace that surpasses everything you can understand, but no, you will go through hardships. There's this, for some odd reason in our world, this mindset that, oh, just become a Christian and everything will be great. I don't know about you, but I remember the day that I was like saved. You know what I'm saying? Like I grew up in the church, so like I did the songs and like Jesus at 5 years old, I was like, yeah. But like I remember the day where I knew Jesus I knew Jesus. You know what I'm saying with that? Like you can know Jesus, but when you know Jesus, there's a difference in that. And I remember the day when I really knew Jesus. It didn't get like super easy after that. Things got hard. I still faced stuff that I was like, God, where are you at? Why? I've still asked that question. He offers peace, but there's a promise of tribulation. There's a promise of struggles. But here's what's so interesting to me. You continue to read this, right? He offers this gift of peace. He promises trials and sorrows. Next sentence. But. I love when Jesus uses the word but because it's like the biggest buts in the world. Okay? But take heart. Because I have what? Y'all, that is good news. I give you peace. I promise tribulation. Hey, but don't worry. I've overcome it all. Here he is. Again, let's remind ourselves of where we're at, right? Remind ourselves that this is Jesus talking with his disciples before all of that stuff. He knows what's to come, but yet what does he do? He claims victory. He speaks of his victory, not the disciples. He doesn't say, but take heart, like you'll be okay. No, he says, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And if you are in relationship with me, you too will be an overcomer. This statement is audacious. He claims victory in the shadow of the cross and goes to it not in fear. He doesn't fear the cross anymore, even in gloom, but he goes to it rather as a conqueror. He sees it and he says, I'm going to conquer that. I'm going to use that for a purpose. Something that culturally was deemed as horrific and brutal and painful, and they use it as this symbol of, look what we can do. Jesus takes it and he literally is hanging on the cross and he's using it now as, yeah, but look what I can do. He flips the script once again. He promises all of this stuff. And he walks with them all through this, and I just wonder sometimes, what are these 12 young guys sitting there thinking? How are they taking this in? What are they in the midst of all of this? What is Judas thinking? What about Peter, James, and John? What about Thomas? What are they thinking? What are they processing? Because in these next few days, they're going to be tried, tested, and torn apart. Hear me on that. They're going to have everything tried and everything tested, and they will be torn apart. They're going to have to figure out what life after Jesus looks like. And they don't even get it yet. But here's what's crazy, that after all of this, After all of this, what does Jesus do? He comes back and he empowers them. And we're going to get to that later. He trusts them, though. And if I've learned kind of anything in my life, for me personally, it's this. And I remember being told this once and Josh kind of talked about this last week. You can't be trusted until you've been tested. Remember when Josh was talking about like that question of like, God, like I'm dealing with all this stuff. I'm walking through all this stuff with my finances and all this tension and all of that. Like, God, when am I going to just get your blessing? And the conversation he had with, at the time, one of the youth pastors we were working with, of God's preparing you for a blessing, but how could he trust you right now with that blessing if you don't know how to stewardship, right? If you don't know how to steward it correctly. What if God is moving and preparing us for something great, but he's using some of these trials and pain that we go through in life, because remember, we're promised that, to show us what he is all about at a grander, bigger scale. These young men are going to go and become some of the greatest evangelists the world has ever known. Period. They're going to do things that blow people's minds. They're going to do incredible things, and they're going to do it all in his name. But they're going to have to endure first. They're going to have to go through stuff first. I truly think that suffering puts us in touch with our fragility. We remember that we're not invincible. And I think this is why we naturally pray more in trials. You know those valleys where you're going through life and you're like, man, like, God, where are you? And you're going through all these struggles. Maybe it's just me, but for some odd reason, when I was going through those things, I seem to pray a lot more often. You know what I'm saying? Right? When you're going through something that's hard, it's always like, God, we got to talk again. And then like you get it out, and then you're like 2 minutes later, you're like, God, I don't know if I got voicemail that time or what, but we need to have another discussion because it didn't improve yet. And you're just waiting, and you're having these conversations and these prayer moments with God in the pits and in the valleys. But then when he delivers you and when he brings you to the mountaintop, what happens? Why is it we become silent sometimes? Oh man, look what I've overcome. And God's like, oh really? I remember us talking. Why are you not talking to me when you're standing on this mountaintop, Kyle? I used all of that to show you all of me. Did you forget that? I think so oftentimes that we easily forget what God is all about and who he truly is. We forget that God can use anything and everything for the glory of him. Romans 8, and Paul writes it in Romans when he's talking to the church in Rome, and he says, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. God causes everything to work together for the good. That means those trials, that means those valleys, that means the dark pits, that means the moments where it just doesn't seem like God's light is even showing through. God uses those times to work together for the good of those who trust and follow him. And we know this. Let's not misunderstand that. We know. Paul doesn't write, we speculate. He doesn't write, we think, or we guess, or even we hope. He says, we know. We know that all things work together for his good and our good. If he is in us and we are in him, we can have a comfort knowing that his good is ultimately our good. Even when it doesn't make sense. Understanding, right? Understanding God can wait, but obedience cannot. We don't have to understand it always, but we get to obey it. God knows what we need, when we need, and how we need it, although it may not make sense to us even in those moments. We can trust and we can know that all things, not just some, but all things work together for the good. The hard, the messy, the hurtful, the painful. All things work together for the good. And I think so often when we go through these things, we get this urge in us to say like, God, I just want to take refuge. I just want a shelter. I just want like this giant umbrella to protect me from the rain down of all the bad things. You know what, anybody? Anybody, right? And you're like, God, like, where are you, God? Where are you? And we have this maybe mindset that like when we take refuge in God, it's going to say like, nothing bad will happen after that then. But like God, hear me on this. God is our refuge in trouble, but not from trouble. We can find peace in him in the midst of chaos. We can have hope in the midst of fear and failure, and we can be secure in the midst of uncertainty. I think we've said it before of the presence of evil does not mean God is not there, right? The presence of evil doesn't mean God is not there. It might just simply mean God is standing there and saying, okay, but watch what I'm about to do through that. Watch who I'm about to connect you with it through that. Don't you forget who I am. God handles us and can handle us in those moments. He wants us to seek him and go to him. And I think so often in our struggles, we try to run. We try to run. And maybe it's me. When I face things in life, I'll pray to him, but I won't actively run towards him. I'll pray, God, deliver me from this. But I won't actively maybe run towards him and seeking that deliverance. I'll expect him to deliver me as I'm standing here, but he may say, just take a few steps towards me and I will deliver you. Yeah, but it's comfortable right here. Well, it's not really comfortable. It actually stinks right here too, but like, I don't want to move because I'm scared. I'm scared. But you want me to deliver you, Kyle? Yeah, I do. So take a step. I'm scared. We run. We either run from him, or maybe we stand still, or maybe we just ignore him. How oftentimes in our life do we push him to the side? Instead of filling our life and our worship with him, we fill it with things of the world. We need to let worship flow from our lips and not worry. That's hard. That's hard. It was one of those weeks. You guys have grown to know that this little notepad thing is supposed to keep me on track. Doesn't do well because Kyle's ADHD. And I had a friend this week go through a lot of stuff. And I remember talking with them. Hard stuff. It was that pain and that question of like, well, why, God? I trust you, but God, why? How often do we forget the pain and the struggle to let worship flow rather than worry? I remember talking with them and having the conversation of, well, God will provide, right? Like that's what a good pastor's supposed to say. And as I was about to say that like over multiple times, I remember God just saying like, but do you remember some of those moments for you? So what do they really need to hear? And so like the good person I looked at them and I said, yeah, that stinks. I'm so sorry. And I wish I could do something. And I know that you know God will provide, but like right now it's okay just to grieve and mourn and be frustrated. Like God will take care of it and you know that, but why don't you tell me what else is going on? In that conversation, right? Sometimes that conversation is freeing because that allows us to open up about the scars in our life. the pain that we've walked through. And as we journey through life, I'm reminded of the power of scars. I'm sure most of us have some scars, right, on our bodies. Scars maybe when we were growing up, maybe we fell down, scraped up our knees or our elbows or something. I know for me, like I look at my body, I have scars. Maybe it's both my elbows are scarred up. Maybe that's because, the scar on my elbow is my brothers and I, when we were younger, we decided to build this ramp. And we were going to jump bikes over a creek, right? And I, being the oldest, was like, well, I'm going to go first. But I didn't want to use my bike in case I broke it didn't work. So I used my little brother's. And it was one of those, little ones that, if you're over a certain weight, a certain height, you really shouldn't use. But I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. So I get on this bike, and I'm looking at this ramp. I'm like, all right, we're going to hit it full speed, and we're going to go. And right when I'm, coming off the ramp, I'm going to, pull up, and, that way I, get enough air to go over it, and then I'm going to land it, and all is going to be great. I cleared a path. Everything should be fine. The trees are out of the way. I think this is going to work. So I get going, pedal, and I hit the ramp, and I pull up, and the handlebars come off. Do you know how hard it is to land a bike with no handlebars? I'm going to tell you, hard. Do you know how hard it is to keep a bike in between your legs also with no handlebars? Really hard. And so as Kyle is now handlebars are here, bike is going there, and Kyle's like, it's like that freeze frame. Have you ever watched those movies where it's like a freeze frame and it's like, bet you're wondering how we got here. Yes. That was like slow motion for Kyle, right? And I come and I hit the bank, and I'm bleeding, and and I'm like, dramatic, right? Because that's what you are as a kid. I'm like, I broke my holds on your body. Go get mom. And my two brothers are sitting there, and they're like, we'll wait for you. and going back and trying to tell my mom as I'm carrying the bike in two pieces and go in, and I tell her what happened. She just looked at us and she's like, go outside and go jump in the pool and deal with it. You'll be fine. I'm like, okay. Trust me, my mom loved us so much that she started to understand that us three boys were not the brightest light bulbs always. And so when we came back with blood, she'd look at it. She'd be like, yeah, you're okay. Go figure it out. Or I got some pretty bad scars on my knees, and even right here on this one leg, I don't grow much leg hair because I slide a lot in softball, and I wear shorts. You think I'd learn after all these years to put pants on. I don't. But anyways, my knees are pretty scarred up. I was playing roller hockey, and I got checked into a chain link fence, and then I came down, and my knees scraped up on the concrete of a tennis court. It was also in that moment that we learned that the school district doesn't like you playing roller hockey on their tennis courts. Who would have known that those signs are there for a reason? Or the scars. I got a scar on my arm. I was doing some demo work and lifting up a slab of tile. And as I was walking, the slab cut into my arm, and it was bleeding all over the place. And I put that one back together with super glue and duct tape. True story. My mom was so happy when I came home. Scars. They tell stories. Stories, some of them are ones of bad decisions and pain, but others may not be our fault. And some scars are ones that are hidden on the inside or maybe even emotional. I don't have to share those stories always of the emotional scars, do I? You guys get what I'm saying with that? Those scars that are deeply, deeply wounded. Those wounds that seem to take longer than the physical wounds sometimes to heal. I have them. To this day, I struggle with different emotional scars that have been spoken over to me, different words, different pains. Scars, they tell stories. But I also want to encourage you. Talk about them. Share your stories. Allow yourself to share those stories of the scars with others when God allows those right moments. I remember once talking with this same good friend of mine. And I remember having the conversation, we were just sharing different stuff, and I shared some of these emotional internal scars. Deep ones. The ones that I don't want people to know. Because I'm really messed up and I'm really hurt by them. And I remember in the conversation, I don't think I'll ever forget these words. When they looked at me and they simply just said, like, I respect you and I truly feel like I know you. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And this next phrase, I just don't think I'll ever forget. Kyle, I know you walk with a limp, but you've overcome and you've learned how to heal and you've learned how to run with the limp. They weren't talking about a physical limp. It's this emotional, it was a brokenness. And I had to learn how to walk and then run and then continue to live life with it. I want to live my life, and I'd rather be someone who walks with a limp than who walks with a strut. Because the limp says I don't have it all together. The limp says I'm broken and I need somebody to help me and walk with me. But a strut essentially for me, it means that I have it all figured out, and I assure you I don't. And as I look at this and as I think about scars, I can't help but remember that even the resurrected Jesus bore scars. And his scars even tell stories of the battles. So, today, maybe you're asking that question of why or what or how or when. Maybe you walked into this service this morning and you were just done. If we're just going to be real, let's just call it what it is. Maybe you walked in and you just felt so defeated that you didn't know what to do. I want to simply say to you, there's something special about being called a child of God. That it is well with my soul, even when my circumstance, it is not well. It is well with my soul, even though my life feels like it's falling apart. It can be well with my soul, even when I'm sitting in a pit of darkness. It can be well with my soul, even when everything is broken and I don't know what way is up. It can be well with my soul, even when I just simply don't understand and I don't see God right now. But it is well with my soul. And sometimes we just need to say that. Those young guys that Jesus was talking to in John 16. I often wonder what those 3 days were like when Jesus was gone. What questions they had. What tension they felt. For some of them, they went back to what they knew. Fishing. That's where Jesus found some of them. I also imagine them sitting around often trying to understand and debate this, right? How is this going to happen? Like, he said something about 3 days, and what in the world is he talking about? And I'm sure they even asked the same questions of, like, was Jesus really who he said he was? And here is something that is so beautiful to me. And we've talked about this, and you probably have read this next verse, this passage, multiple times. But I was sitting with other pastors at this 41 Hours retreat. There's something that just jumped out to me that is so beautiful and encouraging to me. Great Commission, Matthew 28, right? Most of us would know or have heard it. It's where Jesus looks at his disciples, right? He comes back from the dead and he's about to go back to be with his daddy in heaven. And he looks at his disciples and he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So go now and make disciples and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them all of your ways. Everything that I've taught you, you go and do. And fear not. I'm with you to the end of the day. How many of us have heard that before, right? Or some variation. But here's what's crazy. Matthew 28. So that starts in 18, right? Verse 18. If you back up 2 verses, this is so intriguing to me. 2 verses. This is what Jesus says 2 verses prior to this. This is the context, right? He shows up and it says, meanwhile, the 11 disciples heard the wonderful news from the woman and left for Galilee. So here they are. The ladies come and they're like, Jesus is back. And they're like, what? No way. And they leave and they start going to Galilee, okay? And they go to the mountain where Jesus had arranged to meet them. So they're anticipating to meet Jesus here. And the moment they saw him, no hesitation, the moment they saw him, they worshiped him. They worshiped him. But, again, there's some big buts. But, some still had lingering doubts. Jesus died, went to the grave, resurrected, and they're coming back, and they're at the mountaintop, and they're meeting with Jesus, and they see him, and the first thing they do is what? They worship him. Even in the midst of their doubts. Hear me on this. Hear me on this. They just saw a resurrected Jesus. They just now are like seeing him, speaking with him. He is here. And even in the midst of physically being able to walk up to him and touch him and hold him and grab him, what do? Some of them still have what? Doubts? Doubts. And even in the midst of their doubts, what does Jesus do? He looks at them and he says, all authority has been given to me from heaven and on earth. Even when you doubt and are struggling right now, you go and make disciples and teach them. They're doubting. Still, they're struggling. Why? Because they're humans like us and they don't get it always. But he looks at them and he says, even in the midst of all this, go and do it. If you might be in that position right now, where you are struggling, even in the doubts and the brokenness, God is still with you, and he's looking at you, and he's calling you a child of him, and he says, go and make disciples. It doesn't make sense right now, but I will use it for the good of the kingdom. You will see goodness come from this.